So, Larry, normally we talk about what's happened during the week, particularly what the Fed might make of it, what might happen with rates. But it strikes me there isn't a lot of that this week. Let's talk about larger issues that you are focused on.
David, I think it's important for us always to remember that ultimately trends are more important than events. And trends most of the time are positive, and events most of the time are negative. So we have to step back and look at things that may be markers of trends. And I saw two such things this week. China's huge evolution away from the zero COVID strategy and what happened with ChatGPT from OpenAI, which may be a marker of a profound change in what it means to be a machine and what it means to be human.
So let's take each of those up in turn, if we could, Larry. Let's start with China, because as you say, they really are backing off of their strict policy on COVID and the isolation and that they've been pursuing, and also a lot of the testing. But do we know yet whether that's going to be positive or negative? It could be positive for the economy, but on the other hand, if they have a real spike in cases and really overload their medical system, we may have a problem.
Look, I think we know two things. We know that a big change in China happened because of an expression of popular will and protests. That's a profound thing for the governance of that superpower with 1.4 billion people. You're quite right. We don't yet know how this is going to work out. Is this going to be a successful rejoining of the reality of the rest of the world? Or is this going to lead to catastrophic delegitimizing performance of the Chinese healthcare system? And we don't know. But either way, there's a big chance that China's going to be a quite different country 6 months from now than it is today. And so I think all of us are always watching China carefully, but we need to be watching China much more carefully over the next 6 months, when you're going to be seeing leadership change at the same, below the level of Xi Jinping, of course, at the same time that we're going to be seeing probably the biggest set of policy experiments that we've seen in China in decades.
So let's turn to that second subject, the OpenAI creation of ChatGPT. I won't pretend that I understand this, but I have read about it. Again, is this a positive thing or potentially a negative thing? Because we already have a lot on the internet. We don't know where it comes from or its origins. Now we're going to have something we can't even tell whether a person created it.
Look, when I went to graduate school, we used to estimate statistical models with 5 parameters. Now there are going to be 175 billion parameters that go into one of these systems. The great computer scientist Alan Turing, 70 years ago, said that it was going to be a threshold for humanity when a machine could imitate a human being's answers to questions in a way where another human being wouldn't be able to tell the difference. We're somewhere in the territory of that right now, and that is a profound thing for humanity. It points to a profound change in the way we're all going to be working. We're all going to have a kind of caddy that, or many of us are going to have a kind of caddy that is going to augment our creativity, augment our capacities to bring knowledge to bear on what we do, augment our accuracy. But just as the printing press or electricity was a huge change because it was a general purpose technology, this could be the most important general purpose technology since the wheel or fire. And that is something we are all going to be changed by. My hope is that the very transcendence of these kinds of events can bring a kind of unity, because they are so large relative to the differences between Democrats and Republicans or even the difference between the West and China, that these opportunities and threats, because they are both, whether it's microbes, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's climate change, that the very transcendence of these global events can become a source of cohesion and progress. But there is no assurance at all of that. We are living in truly historic times.
Larry, I want to talk about a different sort of threshold that I came across this week, and I was a little bit surprised. I was reading Bono, the leader of U2, his new memoir called Surrender. It's a fascinating book. I find it very, very compelling. And who do I find in there but one Larry Summers, when you were, according to Bono, a reasonably new Treasury Secretary. And he came in to meet with you and Sheryl Sandberg and Stephanie Flanders to talk about debt forgiveness for the poorest countries. And according to his rendition of it, you started with President Clinton, a real process that led to really historic changes in the debt of some of the poorest countries in the world. What about that? We've still got a long way to go, don't we?
David, Bono is an unlikely but very close friend. I will confess it, I'd never heard of him before we had our meeting, and Sheryl Sandberg had to force me to take the meeting because I thought secretaries of the Treasury should only meet with people who had a first name and a last name. But he was mesmerizing both in his charisma and his knowledge. And he drove that debt relief program forward. We had an unlikely coalition, Pat Robertson, Senator Jesse Helms, and we were able to do something that I think was hugely important for the African continent at that time. Sad to say, right now the world needs comprehensive debt relief for the poorest countries, and what the world is getting is grudging, incremental, partial, limited, small efforts. And we've got to find a way to do better. And I hope Bono's going to get the band together again. I'm certainly willing to do my part to help. This time it's going to be different because a lot of that debt is owed to China. And finding a way, even when things are vexed with China, to involve them in helping these countries move forward based on an understanding of how they see the issue is going to be necessary and profoundly important for a large number of human lives.
And finally, Larry, give us a moment, if you would, on what we normally do on this program, which is talk about what happens this week, and specifically on the question of the likelihood of a recession. We saw developments in the marketplace, oil price coming down, bond yields coming down, stocks coming down. Most people think that has to do with real anticipation of a significant recession. Where are you on that?
I've been saying soft landing, very unlikely for a while, and I think it's looking even more unlikely right now. I noticed that the consensus, as reflected by the FT University of Chicago survey of a group of 50 economists, is now moving closer to where I've been. They're saying that we're going to have a recession and that the unemployment rate will peak at 5.5%. That's up from where they were, way ahead of where the Fed is. I've been saying 6%. So I think there's a growing coming together that we probably are going to make more progress on inflation than many people expected, but it's because the Fed is going to do what's necessary, but there's likely to be some adverse aspect of that. But, you know, David, next week I hope we can talk about what's happening globally, because we tend to focus here just on the American picture. But the two other major poles of the economy, China and Europe, are both going to have a huge impact on how this all plays out globally.